Hunter traits. These are some of the most interesting and game-changing parts of Identity V. Hunters for years have strategized what the best use for each trait is, and in some cases finding new uses not previously known before. They add a layer of depth that goes deeper than just seeing who the hunter is and playing around their weaknesses. With such a cool twist on the typical asymmetrical 1v4 experience, one would think that the devs would be sure to add more traits so that players can constantly look forward to new strategies to change up the game. But there hasn't been. Not since a year ago, not since global release, not since ever. The game has had the same 7 traits since it released worldwide, and there has never been another trait officially added for players to discover and mess around with. It seems that the developers have somehow overlooked one of the biggest parts of the game, a mechanic that can decide games and truly test the player's skill. So where are the new traits, and why hasn't there been any? Well, there was a new trait added. There has been one leak in particular that has introduced a new trait, one showing a trait that has appeared just as suddenly as it disappeared. Most people would think to the new trait that leaked about a month ago, but this actually goes much deeper than just a month. No, we're talking about a trait that dates all the way back in 2018, when the game was still fresh, only being less than half a year old at the time. At this time, the devs were much more willing to play around with their game. Characters and map releases were much more frequent, and everything was constantly seeing improvements and additions. At this stage of the game's life, it only felt natural that new traits be added regularly just as new characters were being implemented. Thus, on September 23rd, 2018, the first glimpse of the new trait would show up on a YouTube channel by the name of First Soldier Gaming. Right away when opening the trait selection page, hunters, you can see that there was in fact a new trait in development. With some help of Chinese translators, it was found that the name roughly translated to hiding. This new trait in particular bared an insidious looking face with a cooldown of 90 seconds after use. Taking a look at it, it does something very unique that otherwise only one other hunter in the game can do, and that is the removal of a heartbeat and red light for the hunter. Essentially, this trait would literally conceal the survivor's heartbeat and remove the hunter's red light from survivors so that the only thing visible is the body of the hunter, and would allow for anyone to get the jump on a survivor as any hunter. There was one problem though. It was still in the test server, so the player base didn't quite have access to it yet. Still though, the trait looked nearly finished, which implied it would show up globally soon, right? And yet, it disappeared. After First Soldier's second video showcasing what the trait does, there has been no follow-up gameplay of any sort. The most likely explanation is that nothing was ever done with the trait and was likely removed. Not even the wiki makes any mention of there once being a hiding trait, and it's almost as if it never existed in the first place. Even then, so what if one thing doesn't go through? Surely the devs would either bring it back in a new form or just make a new trait entirely. But as months turned to years, it became apparent that it wasn't coming back. So then what happened to this trait? Why hasn't it returned despite looking complete? And why have we never seen another new trait in years? The devs didn't exactly keep in touch much with the community as a whole, especially with how divided it was between the servers, so it's up to interpretation what the reason for the removal could be. One possible explanation is the meta. During September 2018, the meta compared to today was extremely different, with Smiley Face and Geisha being the two best hunters respectively. Besides those two, only a few other hunters existed at the time, and every single one, even the best options, were way worse if not downright unplayable at this time. But that's not to say that this trait would have no place for any of them. One hunter in particular comes into mind: Ripper. Ripper, much like today, still had the ability to become invisible, meaning that a simple press of this trait would render him truly invisible. No body, no heartbeat, no light, no nothing. There would be almost no way of knowing he was coming before it was too late. Could it be that the developers thought adding it would make Ripper too strong? Admittedly, Ripper was much worse at this time, having no way of using foggy blades outside of these things called fog circles, a former external trait which hovered over survivors who stayed still too long.
Yep, so he's coming after me. And so I'm just kind of being dumb here. He's gonna hit me though, right? Because he hit me with foggy blade. So for those who don't know, with the Ripper, you have like this area attack, and it shoots forward when he's in his own fog. So unfortunately, the fog started setting in right at the end there. So me trying to be a jerk over there, trying to flashlight him, got me hit. Despite having infinite foggy blades inside the fog,
any survivor could have easily walked out and thus leaving the Ripper with no source of damage. Even so, the trait could still be used early game behind walls to get the jump on survivors so they don't leave the foggy area so soon even without invisibility, which can give the presence necessary to use it anywhere at any time for even more power later on. Not long after the trait was leaked, this ability was removed and instead replaced with one Foggy Blade that he could use anywhere for every 20 seconds, a change that made Ripper significantly better in the meta and at some point even made him the best hunter in the game. With an easy way of doing damage anywhere now, it would allow Ripper to gain presence necessary to become invisible and take advantage of this trait, thus making him a total nightmare with this trait. So is Ripper the reason why this trait wasn't added? Maybe, but this explanation still doesn't explain everything. Just look at today's meta. There are Dream Witches dropping 2 or 3 patrollers within seconds of each other, and Breaking Wheels that blink and kill survivors in one hit even if they dodged every trap before that perfectly. Blink and Patroller were designed to be strong enough to guarantee a hit, but also weak enough so that survivors could still have a chance at half health. Yet current hunters either reuse this trait multiple times or knock down survivors in one hit in early games so they never get a second hit chance. Both of these going against what the devs intended. If the devs really cared about keeping traits fair, then why do these frustrating combos still exist? But that's just it. They're frustrating. It's frustrating to get hit by multiple patrollers or blinks by a Dream Witch. It's frustrating that Wheel can kill people in one hit with a blink even if they missed every single trap. And it's especially frustrating when hunters pick a trait that doesn't logically address the weaknesses of a certain hunter, but still manage to get value even when they really shouldn't have in the first place. This is the reason why the devs to this day have not added a new trait. Because as it turns out, every trait, in one way or another, share one thing in common. They're frustrating for players. You can do everything right as Survivor and still end up losing out on a win because of a trait. And it's gotten so bad to the point that players pick hunters that combine so well with the trait that survivors have very little chance at kiting long, if at all. Balancing the already 7 existing traits is a ridiculously difficult task, since nerfing them impacts every hunter, and buffing weaker ones could lead to the same problem. Introducing new traits would add way too much from a balancing perspective. It would make it almost impossible to balance the game at that point with traits constantly being added. The devs have already nerfed Abnormal and Patroller, and both of these nerfs were because of Dream Witch abusing them. And even now, Dream Witch still abuses the traits, often starting with Patroller and switching to Blink and Abnormal later on, leading to very boring and drawn-out games. Traits are good for the game, but the wrong hunters can make it unhealthy as well. Adding more will more than likely just add fuel to the fire, and history only repeated itself when a new trait from a month ago that suddenly got leaked just as suddenly disappeared. Now, the first ever leaked trait only serves as a reminder of the developer's reluctancy to add any new traits, and that is the unsolved mystery of the forgotten trait of Identity 5.